A lush and fertile planet located in the Nathema system, a star system on the edges of the Sith Empire, Medriaas served as a productive agri-world for the Empire in the centuries before 5113, before the Battle of Yavin. Medriaas orbited a bright orange sun and possessed a Type 1 atmosphere that was breathable for both humans and Sith. The terrestrial planet's agricultural fields were dotted with dozens of farming villages, though by the time of the Great Hyperspace War in 5000 before the Battle of Yavin, Medriaas had at least one city. Medriaas possessed oceans which separated at least two continents on the planet's surface, and the northern continent was considered to be remote in relation to the seat of power held by Sith Lord Dramath. Medriaas had already been discovered and settled by the Sith Empire in the centuries before 5000, before the Battle of Yavin, and by the year 5113, the planet was ruled by the Sith Lord Dramath. Dramath had an affair with a farm woman on the northern continent, and when he left the region, he promptly forgot about the woman and the son she bore, who was but one of the many of his offspring. 4 years later, the child, who had been named Tenebrae, began to exhibit signs of force sensitivity, which meant he was a member of the planet's ruling elite. Tenebrae's adoptive father confronted his wife over the fact that neither of them were force sensitive. The mother then admitted that she had an affair with the ruling Sith Lord. Her husband attacked her in rage, but then her son stepped in and used the Force to snap his father's neck in an instant. As for the mother, as punishment for being unfaithful and betraying her family, Tenebrae tortured her for months using the Force, until he eventually killed her. His mother was mentioned by Dramath at a later point, as he claimed he had ordered Tenebrae's mother to drown him when she had the chance. After the death of his mother, the young Tenebrae proceeded to take control of his village, torturing and killing with the Force those who refused to submit to his authority. Tenebrae proceeded to conquer the northern continent over the next 4 years, amassing legions of followers and eliminating thousands during his rise in order to feed his appetite for pain and suffering. The Sith Lord Dramath believed the rumors of these events to be beneath him, and it was not until 4 years later that the Sith Lord decided to visit Tenebrae and determine whether to kill him or make him into a servant. But, to Dramath's surprise, the 10-year-old stripped his father of the Force and drove him insane before killing his body and imprisoning his Force spirit in a holocron, so that he could continue to torment and torture him. Over the next 3 years, Tenebrae continued his conquest of Medriaas and eliminated every Sith challenger who tried to oppose him. In the year 5100, at 13 years of age, he claimed the throne of Medriaas, while his half-brother Dramath II fled in fear of his sibling's power. Now the undisputed ruler of the world, Tenebrae presented himself before Dark Lord of the Sith, Marka Ragnos, the ruler of the Empire at the time, on the capital of Ziost, and an impressed Ragnos granted him official rule of Medriaas and the title of Lord Vitiate. The teenage Sith Lord returned to his world and renamed it Nathema, building himself a palace on the site of his childhood home and spending the next century studying the depths of the dark side of the Force. A century later, Marka Ragnos' death in the year 5000 before the Battle of Yavin sparked a struggle for succession between the Sith Lords Naga Sadow and his rival Ludo Kresh. Vitiate refrained from involving himself or Nathema in the political infighting, and Nathema continued existing in its isolation. As the Empire crumbled under a Republic assault, Vitiate remained engrossed in his studies, thereby sparing Nathema from the devastation of war. But in the aftermath of SWTOR's defeat at Korriban, Vitiate emerged from his seclusion and began to use the Empire's fear to his advantage, broadcasting speeches from his palace that described how the Republic would pursue them and massacre the people of the Empire. He drove Nathema and the rest of the Empire into a terrified and desperate frenzy. He brought them to such a point of panic and fear that they would bow before anyone who offered them hope, and he was the one to deliver it. At the same time, Vitiate had a team of historians and researchers search for a long-lost Sith colony world of Dromund Kaas, to where he planned to retreat in order to avoid the Jedi. When the lead researcher finally presented him with their successful findings, Vitiate immediately sent out a call to all of the remaining Sith Lords within the Empire. Nathema's ruler came to Korriban and promised to lead them all in a great ritual of Sith magic that would bring about the Empire's salvation. More than 8,000 Sith Lords answered his call, traveling to Nathema alongside Vitiate. 3 days later, Vitiate publicly announced the commencement of the ritual, and the Sith who had come to Nathema gathered in his palace. But, to their surprise, the scholarly Sith turned on them and dominated their minds, binding all of them to his will and feeding on their strength as he began the ritual. At that point, Nathema's entire government came to a halt. At a later point in time, the Jedi Meetra Surik was unable to find any electronic records after Vitiate's announcement. It appeared as if time had frozen still on the planet the moment this announcement was documented. In fact, based on the evidence she saw when she visited the planet, it appeared all life had ceased to exist on the planet at that time. The ritual took a week, by the end of which the entire planet was stripped of the Force. Vitiate absorbed the life force of every living organism on the planet, leaving behind piles of dust as Nathema's inhabitants, wildlife and flora simply disintegrated. Cities, villages, vehicles, and other inanimate objects remained behind, though the ritual destroyed almost all of the planet's technology as power was ripped from the circuitry. The only species on Nathema that survived the cataclysm were Vorclaw, semi-sentient insectoid bipeds who lived underground. The Vorclaw hive mind was obliterated by the ritual, leaving their colonies nothing more than groups of mindless individuals who eventually emerged onto the surface, driven by hunger. In the utter absence of any other food, the creatures turned to cannibalism, attacking and eating each other. The ritual transformed Vitiate, making him immortal and granting him immense power in the Force, and he shed his title to become known only as the Emperor. Vitiate blamed the destruction of Nathema on the Jedi, driving the people of the Empire further into a panic, while also offering them hope and revenge on the Republic. Gathering the remnants of the shattered Empire, especially those of the younger generation, Vitiate boarded a small fleet with them and departed for Dromund Kaas on an exodus. He ensured that the journey would last 20 years to reach the planet of Dromund Kaas, which none but the Emperor knew was their destination, as he killed all those that did, so that the people would come to rely only on him as their savior. Vitiate erased all mentions of Nathema from history, beyond the name of the ritual of Nathema, which Imperial scholars celebrated as one of the greatest achievements of the Old Empire. He also ensured that any data on the hyperspace routes back to Nathema was destroyed, ensuring that no one would ever discover the truth of Nathema and how he gained his power. The planet Nathema has then become, essentially, Vitiate's playground. Vitiate reconstituted the Sith Empire on Dromund Kaas and ruled it for centuries, using essence transfer to move from one host body to another whenever he needed, ensuring he'd outlive his mortal body. He kept the existence of Nathema secret from his empire, but continued to use the ruined world for his own purposes. Nathema was stripped of the Force, and was thus a perfect prison for Force sensitives who were unable to draw upon the Force to escape. Vitiate had established the Sanitarium, a laboratory in which his enemies who were strong in the Force could be experimented upon. The only structure on the planet with signs of life, the Sanitarium was fashioned out of grey rock, with the bulk of the structure located underground, where Vitiate kept a vault of dark relics and artifacts. In that vault he stored the holocron that contained the trapped essence of his father, Dramath, whom Vitiate continued to torment over the centuries. He also captured the few remaining Vorklaw survivors and stored them in carbonite inside the vault, to be awakened and used as guardians whenever needed. Seeking to create an army of incredibly powerful but utterly subservient Force users, Vitiate brought groups of Force sensitives to Nathema, forcing them to brave the Force void there. His efforts were only partially successful and resulted in him founding the Nathema Zealots, who withstood the horror of the void through a daily regime of rituals and meditation that focused their power, while also diminishing their free will. The disadvantage of this process was that the Zealots became dependent on the void for their survival, becoming catatonic if they left the planet's surface. To extract some value from his failed experiment, Vitiate repurposed the Zealots as guards for the Sanitarium, the halls of which were also patrolled by mutated creatures from other worlds, genetically engineered to instill fear, terror, and obedience into the prisoners. Members of the Sith Empire's ruling Dark Council eventually rediscovered Nathema's existence and the way to it, and the Dark Councillors, Darth Nihris and Darth Zedrix, had both visited Nathema at some point before 3954, before the Battle of Yavin. This would be more than 1,000 years after the destruction of Nathema's planetary life. Upon learning that the Emperor wished to start a new war with the Republic in order to perform his ritual again on the galactic scale, Nihris, Zedrix, and several other councillors formed a conspiracy to unseat the Emperor. In the year 3960, before the Battle of Yavin, the Jedi Knights Revan and Malak had discovered information about the planet's location and travelled to the desolate world of Nathema, where they witnessed what the Emperor had done to it, learning of Nathema's history and the location of Dromund Kaas from what was left of the government's archives. They then journeyed to Dromund Kaas to confront the Emperor, but they were instead turned to the dark side and made into Sith Lords. The two were sent back to conquer the Republic in the Emperor's name, but Revan eventually returned to the light and resisted this quest. Still, he suffered from broken memories. For a time, he forgot what was lurking in the unknown regions, and when he remembered, in 3954 before the Battle of Yavin, Revan decided to follow his broken memories to uncover the threat which he could not remember, and took his ship, the Ebon Hawk, to the Nathema system. Around the same time, Darth Nihris inducted the Sith Lord Scourge into the conspiracy and took him to Nathema to show him what the Emperor was capable of. Scourge was horrified by the planet, and as the two were leaving, they sensed Revan's arrival in the Force and attacked the Ebon Hawk. Losing control of his ship, Revan was unable to stop the Hawk from crashing to the surface of Nathema, where he was captured by Scourge and Nihris and taken back to Dromund Kaas to be imprisoned. The two Sith didn't notice Revan's utility droid, T3M4, who spent the next 3 years rebuilding the damaged ship with the materials he scavenged on the planet. T3 intended to return to Revan's wife, Bastila Shan, as per his instructions, but he and the Ebon Hawk were caught up in the conflict known as the Dark Wars, and the droid became the companion of Revan's former ally, Meetra Surik. Finally, in 3950, T3 was able to explain Revan's disappearance to Surik and Shan, and Surik decided to follow Revan into the unknown regions. Arriving on Nathema, Surik and T3 were able to activate what was left of the government's records and learned what had happened to the planet. They then followed Revan to Dromund Kaas, where Surik rescued Revan with the help of Scourge, whom Revan had convinced to help defeat the Emperor. The Lord Scourge would eventually face the Emperor in an attempt to manipulate him and get rid of another Sith Lord by accusing her of treason. At that moment, Scourge faced the Emperor face to face for the first time, and immediately noticed that he was not an ordinary man. As the Emperor spoke, his voice reverberated, as if many voices spoke, each word in unison. And Scourge presumed at that moment, while attempting to conceal his inner terror which emerged upon facing this force of nature before him, that it's likely the life that was drained from the planet of Nathema still existed within the Emperor in some form. The following is an excerpt from the Revan audiobook in which Scourge faces the Emperor.
The figure before him appeared unremarkable. The Emperor was clad in unadorned black robes, the raised hood effectively hiding his face. Yet Scourge could feel the power of the dark side emanating from him with such intensity that it caused a faint rippling of the air. The Emperor rose to his feet, and the Durasteel doors swung shut behind Scourge with a booming crash. Scourge's step faltered briefly at the sound, but he continued forward. As he reached the foot of the pedestal, he dropped to one knee, bowing low, his eyes focused on a spot on the ground in front of him.
"Rise, Lord Scourge,"
the Emperor told him,
"and speak your peace."
There was something strange about the Emperor's voice. It didn't sound like the voice of a single being. It had an unusual echo and resonance, almost as if a great multitude were speaking his words in perfect symphony. A grim theory passed unbidden through Scourge's mind. Was it possible all those that had been consumed by the ritual on Nathema still existed in some form within the Emperor himself? Nyrus said he'd devoured them, but what if she was only partially correct? What if he had imprisoned their spirits inside his own corporeal form, slowly feeding on their life energy over 1,000 years to keep himself young and strong? Scourge pushed such thoughts away. He needed to focus. One wrong word and the Emperor might see through his lies.
"Keep Lord Scourge in custody until this matter is settled." "Forgive me, Lord Emperor,"
Scourge said, speaking quickly but trying to keep his tone humble.
"but Nyrus is expecting my return. If I am absent, she will grow suspicious."
The Emperor's dark eyes seemed to flicker with annoyance, and Scourge feared he had gone too far. The best he could hope for as punishment for his insolence would be a quick and relatively painless death. However, when the Emperor spoke again, it was not to pass judgment on him.
"You are bold to speak to me in this way, and because you are right, I will reward your initiative. This time. If your information proves false, however, you will suffer a fate more terrible than anything you can imagine."